Whether we are there or not, ITSP Magazine still gets the best stories. Plenty of conferences and events spark our curiosity and allow us to start conversations with some of the world's brightest minds. In person or virtually, Sean Martin and Marco Ciappelli go on location and sit down with them at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Together, we discover what the synergy of these three elements means for the future of humanity.
All right, here we are. So
Okay.
Ryan already said it. You got it all lined up?
Nope,
Musical chairs?
Figure it out.
Most people probably
Didn't seem that hard.
From out there.
And I'm in the wrong spot anyway. But anyway, here we are. I'm Sean Martin, the co-founder of ITSP Magazine, host of Redefining CyberSecurity Podcast, and a huge fan and friend of the HITRUST community. And I want to echo what Ryan said about the hosts bringing this all together. So everybody can, again, big round of applause to HITRUST and bringing us all together. It's all about the conversation, amazing content this week, collaborating, of course, and bringing together the outcomes that we all want. And I want an even louder clap. I'm going to embarrass somebody. This guy started this stuff back in 2007 and has done an amazing job. Dan Nutkis. So thank you all for that. I'm not going to read the names. It's an amazing panel. We're going to have some incredible conversations today about kind of the history from 2007, what we've encountered in terms of challenges, what we can learn from that, and hopefully what we can do moving forward as we encounter more stuff. So we can all take a seat.
That's it? Okay.
Great. All right. So Dan, I'm gonna keep putting you on the spot here.
Sure.
So you back in 2007, you had a vision and a mission and a passion for bringing this together. What did that look like? Did you know it was going to end up like this?
Yeah, I'm not sure it was a mission, a passion, and a vision. But there was I think there was an intent. And this came about probably in 2006, where we, I think, recognized that there was this deficiency. And it wasn't really raising the bar. As a matter of fact, I think that's a misnomer. It was about establishing a bar and organizations. And it was, I think everyone knows, it started in healthcare, and a number of healthcare organizations wanted a bar. They wanted to know what to do, the guidance that they were receiving, the regulations, they were ambiguous, they didn't know what to do. And so the goal, which we thought was doable, was to establish a framework. And I'm not sure that any of us really knew what that meant, by the way. We knew it wasn't a standard, although it grew into a standard. We thought it would be focused entirely on security, ended up not being entirely on security. And then we didn't realize to actually operationalize it so that you could make it reliable was that you had to build all of these things around it. So, and I think that Cliff was there shortly after. And I think we really just started to take a bite of the elephant and went as far as we could, and we just kept on going. And 17 years later, I think a lot of what we actually put in place were things that we identified years, so it's actually taken us 17 years for things that'll be announced tomorrow and the next day, or actually I guess later today, are things that we actually envisioned at the beginning. We just couldn't get them done.
And it's taken a community to bring it all together. So I don't know if, I'll start at the end, Omar, because I know we've had a number of conversations about the outcomes. What were some of the challenges that you faced, and as a member of the board of directors, how did you see this stuff coming together?
Yeah, I mean, early on, we didn't have the name recognition. It was, who are these guys? What are they doing? And so getting strong leaders and having the right large healthcare leaders on the board and providing their opinions and being vocal, that significantly helped. As Dan mentioned, everything was ambiguous because nothing was defined. There wasn't a clear ask of what was needed. There was somewhat of an understanding of the issue and the problem and the challenge, and the breaches were starting to happen, and we knew we wanted to be compliant, but there was more and more compliance requirements and more authoritative sources. And there was this sense of, this feels like a waste of time. How many of these authoritative sources do we have to comply with? And is everyone going to spend all their time just building crosswalks? Like, why do we have to do that? Can we simplify this? And so the idea of having a single framework, having a single standard, simplifying it was really the key, and eliminating waste. If we could do that, we thought that we'd have a message that would resonate. And for a lot of us, it was selfish. I was at Highmark and I said, this is what I need. So if I can join an industry organization and we can do something that's going to make my life easier, why not? And Robert and the others, we all that's what we said. This is the challenge we face every day. And if HITRUST can address this, we could probably save 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 FTEs worth of work on our own teams.
I think one of the things, and this is to Dan's credit, this was the domain of government or quasi-government institutions, and it took, Dan will appreciate this as a guy from New Jersey, it took chutzpah for somebody to say, I can innovate in the space, right? And we may not have had kind of a sense of trajectory, but Dan had instincts for kind of how to scale, like how to get the right support, how to get the right infrastructure, how to get the right technology, how to get the right automation, how to get the right assurance program. All of those components took an instinct. I'm not sure that any of us, who was innovating in the compliance space, right? Like who in their right mind would say, I'm going to build a whole organization to innovate in the compliance space? But Dan had those instincts, and those instincts have carried us forward in a way that could scale this and make it doable. And I think people underestimate that. They underestimate that, you think you just write a framework and you publish a bunch of authoritative sources. But I think early on, Dan was saying, listen, like if we don't have an assessor community, this fails. Like this doesn't go anywhere. And if we only have the big four, no disrespect to the big four, but if we only rely on the big four and we can't scale this across the nation, it goes nowhere. And so Dan had those instincts from the start, and those instincts carried us forward to what is HITRUST today and has enabled us to scale and continue to scale going forward.
Your thoughts on this?
I'll chime in. Am I live? Am I good?
Should be good.
Yeah, okay. I'll chime in a little bit because I've been doing this for 13 years. I was thinking about this on my flight out here. How long has it been? And I never went through college thinking, I'm going to be an expert in HIPAA or HITRUST, because HITRUST wasn't even a thing back then. But I think what we're collectively saying, what was done all those years ago was truly, it was remarkable, right? To get Anthem and Highmark and HCSC and United and et cetera, on board with setting vision for an entire industry at one time. Truly, truly remarkable. And you look at where we are today, and I know we'll flip the page and talk about more about today, but where we are, an entire industry has adopted and is aware of what this framework is, what it's done, and when we talk about assurances up and down the supply chain, it's there. So there's a lot of positive traction with HITRUST and where it's gone over the years.
Yeah, I think I go back to when I was at one of those companies you mentioned on the board of HITRUST, and I joined that company in 2008. And HITRUST had literally just formed. So I can't say I'm a founding board member, but I'm close. I'm right there at the beginning. And I remember, having come back into healthcare after being in telecommunications for a number of years, and recognizing immediately the challenge that we were facing as an industry, because the focus was singularly on compliance and not necessarily on security outcomes. It was how do we check the box on HIPAA, because that was the big thing everybody was worried about at that point in time. And secondly, it didn't really attract any kind of industry momentum yet, where there were the people that had a point of view that could actually help the industry make the right decisions and create that sort of flywheel effect, if you will, of the industry helping self-govern in an appropriate way. And Dan had the vision, and I think that vision always was built to deliver at scale. And healthcare, arguably, in my opinion, still is one of the most complex industries that exists today. And it's very, very diverse and very dynamic. And it's hard to get anything right there because of the complexity of the system. And but the mission was simple: is how do we make security and then privacy how do we remove that as a barrier from the healthcare industry and a barrier to adoption? And then as healthcare continued to be challenged in our country, and as we looked at our system and other systems that were growing, there was this constant drumbeat of can we make healthcare more efficient? Can we reduce the waste that we spend every dollar on compliance, or duplicate or triplicate or quadruplet, if that's a word, compliance, is a dollar not spent caring for patients and helping people that have needs. And so the mission, at least for I think a few of us that have been in the industry for quite a long time, was really synergistic. It was how do we build a system? How do we empower the supply chain of our system, the people that we do business with, our business associates? How do we engage those people together for a common good? And it seems like from a vision perspective, Dan, you've always been kind of the next step ahead, looking at where cloud was going and looking at where TPRM challenges really were emerging for a lot of us. And I think it's still that way. We're still looking to what's the next challenge, and that's what's kind of exciting here.
So Dan, you mentioned setting the bar, and you spoke to advancements in tech like cloud, and then the need to evaluate the supply chain, which third-party risk management came along. You did a lot of innovative things there as well. It requires a mindset, in my mind, of a community that believes in the same thing and that it can be possible. How did you invigorate folks to become part of this? I know you leveraged a lot of the big names, but there's much more than just a few, right?
Well, I think we tried to be inclusive, and we tried to set out a plan and engage people. I think in general there was a willingness and a want to do better. We started as, I think, compliance, but we quickly transitioned to risk management, realizing that people really wanted to mitigate the risk. And we saw adoption for many reasons. Some that had breaches and they wanted to do better in the future. Some that realized they didn't want to have breaches, and then others that wanted to use it as a way to demonstrate that they were trustworthy, that you should do business with them. And this certainly was on the vendor community. And once we identified those organizations and got groundswell, we found we just got more and more, and as everything tips over, we just continued to tip. But we evolved like everything else. For those that have been with us for many years, the framework was certainly not very mature, and how we developed the framework, I don't know how we even did it. I think we literally maxed out Excel.
I've seen the spreadsheet.
Trying to do it, and now we have tools, and we actually have incorporated AI into those tools to actually help develop the framework and things we never had before. And but I think we did our best. The framework, the assurance methodology, for those that adopted it in the early days, we had very few controls required for certification, and we continue to ratchet that up over time. And probably the one thing I think we've done well, and I think our vision was we would just try to always improve, right? We never said that you wouldn't have a breach being HITRUST certified, but what we hoped was if you had one, none of your peers would have one, right? That we would take the learnings and improve the framework, improve the assurance methodology. And I think through our latest trust report, there aren't a lot of HITRUST certified organizations that get breaches. And I think that is really part of what we tried to start with 17 years ago. And I think we did bring a lot of organizations along. It's always fun for me because a lot of the organizations would always tell me years ago, I can remember a couple of the really big ones, the Fortune 15, you probably remember them as well, never getting HITRUST certified, not going to happen, never going to do it. And then they get HITRUST certified. We love it. It's great. Best thing in the world. It's always so.
Assess once, cover many.
Yeah.
Or assess many, cover once. But for me, having a vision, building something is one piece of the puzzle. Having people that want it is the other piece, and then they have to meet in the middle. I call that operationalizing security or compliance, right? And just down the line, how did you take what HITRUST delivered and embrace it and empower your teams to leverage it for the benefit of your organization and then benefit of your customers?
Yeah, I think like Dan mentions, I think the reason Dan's been successful and HITRUST's been successful, it's about solving problems, like first and foremost. And so, as problems have evolved, HITRUST has adjusted to address those problems directly. And so, whether in the early days, like Dan was mentioning, the industry came to us and said, listen, we have to comply with HIPAA, we've got SOC 2 audits, we've got state. Have you ever tried building a security program around HIPAA? Good luck. Have you ever tried building a security program around SOC trust principles? Good luck. And so, we came away from that and said, listen, all right, we got to do an end-to-end framework for building a robust security program, but we got to add on and build an assurance platform related to that. And so they were married together. And really, that was based on listening to the market and listening to the industry and getting feedback and adjusting. And I think it's been that way throughout. And now, a great example for me, I used this terminology earlier, so forgive me for repeating to folks, but it's mind-boggling that we still exchange documents in this assurance world, right? Like we send each other PDFs and we send each other documents, and you got to go through these PDFs. HITRUST looks at it and goes, that's bonkers, like in this day and age. And so let's deliver these things in an automated way. Let's deliver them through an automated platform. That's what the market's telling us. And that's, I think that's one of the powers of HITRUST, is that the innovation that's been enabled in the space, in the compliance space, folks take that for granted, but it's really difficult in traditional government or quasi-government spaces to be really innovative, and HITRUST has brought innovation to this compliance space, and I think it's reflected that at various milestones throughout its history.
Yeah. For the world that I was in at the time, I think a lot about the challenge of knowing what was needed. And we could all look at the rule, and we could all understand the rule said to do things. And I will argue today that there still is a lack of precedent, at least in healthcare, where organizations that believe they've done the right thing know with confidence that right thing will stand the test of time. So absent that, I started more as for an internal purpose, an internal assurance need for our company, and I said two things I wanted. I wanted to have a clear and understandable way of communicating requirements across, at the time, an organization where I might have had a team of a couple hundred people, and working on security across a much larger organization. And then I needed to have the ability to know with confidence that I could quantify internally for my own purposes that we are making progress. And it wasn't just about achieving the certification, it was about knowing where you were from a baseline so that you could continually advance the ball forward in that regard. And then we had the events of, I want to say 15, 16, the healthcare industry really suffered a significant wave of attacks. And the third-party risk problem for us, we might have been later to the third-party risk dimension of it. We had relationships and third-party risk management programs, but I hadn't yet been able to go that last step of having an expectation that they achieve a security expectation that we would set. And those events really created the catalyst for our company to go to the suppliers we work with, many of which were working with other companies that had already started those conversations, and say, we need you to achieve a certain outcome. And so it really became two needs supported by a single program and a relationship with a single company and a single leader in HITRUST that could actually help us solve both the internal governance and internal assurance problem, me communicating every day to my colleagues and other executives about what we think the right approach to security was in plain, simple English, and then communicating with our third parties. And I think that ability to work both sides of that problem, the two sides of the coin, has really paid great dividends. And I think today many organizations are using a similar approach now and have built on that type of framework.
So my response to that question is that I've said this for a long time. I can get behind anything I believe in. And looking back at the CSF and how it was constructed all those years ago, and you see it today too, we've talked a lot about compliance already. It's not a compliance thing. This is a security initiative. And it goes all the way back to the roots of where HITRUST began. And if you look at just how it's built with consideration to present day threat attackers, threat vectors, it's baked in. So then when you see the residual requirement statements that we're all familiar with, hopefully, when you see those requirement statements, those are very directed to present day attackers and vectors. So For me to, and by the way, I represent kind of the external assessor. I'm not on the adopter side of the house per se. But when we go to market and we're trying to help organizations like yours out there, yes, we want to help with certification. That is the ultimate goal. But it's the belief in, as you come out the other side, that you're going to be way more secure than where you started. And to me, that's always kind of been the underlying theme of why I like what I do, because I get to help a lot of organizations. But it's the belief that we're together helping out the entire industry as a whole through a framework that's got so much, packed into it. So.
Yeah, I think, as I look over the past decade plus, and we just had a board meeting right before this, the amount of energy and excitement we have, and in some cases frustration we have with the status quo, doesn't feel much different today than it did 10 years ago. We still feel like we've got problems to solve. We still feel like there's challenges in the market. What's different is we're solving different problems. We're solving different challenges. We've got a significantly larger amount of stakeholders and constituents, and we're significantly more engaged through all the programs that we have. But so much of it is what Cliff said and what Robert said is, it's this obsession with solving problems. And it's this obsession with solving problems and sensing what the market, what the customers are seeing. And the customer could be the relying party, it could be the assessor, it could be the assessed party, and thinking about all of their needs. I remember when we first rolled out TPRM in a few of the organizations, we had issued a press release saying from now on, we're going to require all of our third parties that have access to our PHI to be HITRUST certified. And I can't remember if that was 2015 or 2016 somewhere, but 8-9 years ago. And we thought this was a really good idea, and we high-fived, and then the vendors learned about all of this and they were up in arms. They're like, what do you mean? You're just going to tell us to do this? We don't know what HITRUST is. We don't know what the requirements are. Or we looked at the requirements. Are you crazy? There's all these requirements. And we said, well, what do? We thought we solved a problem, but we created another one. And until we solve that, we're not really going to solve the initial challenge to begin with. So then we started to have conversations, and we brought the vendors, the BAs themselves together. We realized we needed to listen to them. We created a council for BAs. We realized we needed to grow the assessor ecosystem. And as soon as we thought about this as an ecosystem where we had to work together and we had to partner and we had to figure out how to create sort of incentives and structures and approaches that we felt like we were doing this together, we started to solve it. And since then, we keep solving bigger and bigger problems.
In a full circle moment, we have a Health 3PT Council, we have a vendor subcommittee, and the vendor subcommittee number one requirement is help us communicate to customers that they should be accepting HITRUST. So talk about a full 360 moment there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Although that was one of the most widely attended conferences we ever had.
Yes.
Most vocal too.
And the room was quite a bit deeper than this one, and the line for people to come up and talk was out the door.
Yes.
I remember that.
Yes.
So one of the things I wanted to touch on, you kind of alluded to this a little bit, Omar, is that there's constant change and things are moving, right? Tech, regs, patient care needs, systems that are running the hospitals and other organizations that we're trying to protect. I find that HITRUST kind of shields folks from a lot of that. So the experts and the assessors and the community kind of help pull that all together to provide a nice buffer, if you will, for a lot of that change, and so that organizations can focus on what matters, which is patient care for healthcare and other customer care in other industries. So who can speak to, who wants to start off speaking to kind of the change that we see internally and externally, and how you've leveraged HITRUST to kind of buffer and help manage some of that change?
Yeah, I can speak to that on the third-party risk side, where I spend a lot of my time, and I think often we'll get the pushback around questionnaires, for example. Companies are kind of wedded to the questionnaires, and those questionnaires take on a life of their own, and so the question we'll get is, well, if I don't ask this next question, then what kind of exposure do I create for my company? You know, what kind of compliance exposure? And really, you know, the conversation we should be having is actually, if you ask that additional question, what kind of compliance exposure are you going to create for your company? In other words, if you ask one more question that you can't follow up on, and you can't do appropriate due diligence, and you've got this great documentation trail about everything your supplier is not doing right, what kind of real compliance situation are you creating for your company versus relying on assurance? And so we're kind of trying to flip the conversation here to kind of think about compliance from a different angle. And so that's been a great use case where HITRUST assurance is such a powerful message. And to your point, you know, HITRUST, you know, companies have spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours kind of dedicated to putting the controls in place, to documenting the controls, to getting certified. No individual process that a third-party risk management program does can compensate for that amount of work effort. And so HITRUST kind of shields you as an organization, you as a customer, from you know, your exposure because you couldn't do appropriate due diligence, or you couldn't dig deep enough, or you've created this crazy documentation trail that's now sitting in your GRC. HITRUST provides that cover for you like no other vehicle out there. And that's a great example, I think, of where the framework and assurance has really provided value.
You know, I think it's already been said here, but I'll say it again. The challenges we're solving today are not the challenges we solved, you know, yesterday or last year, and the challenges we'll solve next year are different than the challenges we solve today. And that's been this continuous curiosity, kind of I call it unrestedness. We're kind of unrested about the status quo. You know, how do we want to think about the next place that, you know, each of you sitting in your seats in the organizations that you serve, you know, the challenges you're facing as you look to the environment around you. And it does begin with threats, and the fact that we operate in an environment where the threat landscape has changed remarkably. I think the awareness of the impact to the systems we serve from a bad day has changed remarkably, because we've seen those events that are really, really challenging. And yet if we work from a compliance lens and we work in a regulatory landscape alone, we know with confidence that, you know, if it's untenable for us to keep up, regulations are 2 or 3 years behind us. And so if you really want to think about it, and we really want to think about the problem we're trying to solve, and again, I maintain it's more than the compliance problem, it's about having a system that's continually restless and kind of asking the question, like, what's next? You know, what have we learned from the events of this year? Where do we think the world is going to go next with the advent and the explosion of things like AI? We'll talk a lot about that this week. But we talked about that. ChatGPT came on the scene October, November of 22. Here we are at 24. We started talking in early 23 about the fact that, you know, this AI thing, we now know what that thing is, and we understand it much more clearly. But that thing is going to change the world of security requirements and security needs, because it's taking all the oxygen out of most organizations in terms of IT development and IT capital and all these other things. So we have to stay ahead. So I just think that restlessness is really critical. Just a couple of examples there of how we think about the problem.
I think, some of this is, when you're in a security organization, you realize the amount of things you need to do is a magnitude or two greater than the amount of time and capability and resources and budget that you actually have. And so I almost had this first principle as a CISO, that if there's someone else that can do this, and they can do it even 80% as well as I can or my team can, I would much rather they do it, because the list of things that only my team can do is so long. The default is, let me find someone else to do it. And HITRUST sort of took a lot of things off of my plate, and turns out they actually did it. HITRUST does it way better than my team ever would be able to do it. So to do the crosswalks between compliances, to map threats to controls, to go assess third parties. So I didn't even have the third party risk program in my organization, because all I said to the head of audit who wanted to run third party risk, I said, you can take it as long as we just have something in our contracts that require our third parties to be HITRUST certified. I don't really care about anything more than that, because I have more than enough to do within our four walls. And if someone else is willing to take on what's happening outside of our four walls, namely HITRUST, then that's great. I don't need to go fight for 7, 8, 10 people on my team to go manage 1,000 third parties, because I don't need to. That felt like a waste. That felt like it wasn't the best use of my time. So I saved money, I saved resources, I saved headache, and I got a much better outcome. And that's what I always look to HITRUST for. Is, cyber threat intelligence became a bigger thing 6, 7, 8 years ago. We went to HITRUST and said, hey, HITRUST, all healthcare organizations have a need for cyber threat intelligence. That was still a newer space. And so HITRUST decided they were going to play a role in that. Now, did everything HITRUST do over the last 7, 8 years? Is it still around? Was everything successful? Absolutely not. But that's what it takes to be entrepreneurial and to be successful. Is you will have a long list of failures in your wake, and that's okay. Remember, Microsoft did come up with the Zune, but Microsoft is still doing okay in spite of that. And Amazon did try to get into the phone business, but they're doing okay in spite of that. And the same thing with HITRUST. We've had our share of failures, but every failure led to a significant set of learnings, as Robert mentioned, and that's been key, to be that learning organization that's always market centric.
I will just point out on that one, though, to Cliff's point earlier.
You have a Zoom?
I don't have a Zoom, but
it was an MP3 player, in case anyone doesn't know.
Our foray into cyber threat intelligence and understanding it was really the basis for what we now refer to as cyber threat adaptive, which is kind of one of our more innovative projects and programs that works very well. And it was to this issue with questionnaires and everything else, which was, how do you maintain relevance of a framework? And this is one thing that was extremely frustrating for us. And well, there's a lot of things frustrating for us, but this one in particular happened to be with the fact that everyone would accept the HITRUST certification, but they wanted to ask some additional questions because they didn't feel that we were able to be topical enough, and there were controls that we may, or mitigations we may not have in our framework. And we went to work on that, and really leveraging the threat intelligence that we continuously review, map it to mitigations, and we map it against then our framework, determine if the framework has any deficiencies that would, on the E1, I1, and R2 level, that would jeopardize the security, the control itself. And that became an opportunity for us, and it was one that was really based on our knowledge of threat intelligence. It also made it easier for us to talk to people that said, well, I still need my questionnaire, and we would say, why? What does your questionnaire provide that we don't have in the framework? What threat, what mitigation, what are we trying to do? And I think there's a lot of that. I don't know where Ryan went, but I think Ryan has a lot of those conversations on a regular basis. So anyway, our failed cyber activity actually worked just fine for us.
Well, I'm going to pull back cyber activity as well. So 30 years I used to build and bring Norton antivirus to market. And our biggest challenge with that wasn't the number of threats we were trying to protect against. It was getting enterprises to adopt antivirus in their organization. And guess what? We got the attention of business. We got the attention of government. Everybody's concerned with security now. And there's a lot of pressure to demonstrate that you're doing the right thing, or one could potentially end up in trouble. So how important is reliability, transparency, consistency, demonstrability, and obviously in the context of what we're trying to accomplish here with HITRUST and the community?
I mean, I think it's critical. I really, in today's kind of commercial environment, transparency and reliability, trust is critical. Especially in healthcare, the proliferation of third-party relationships and how important those kind of contracts and relationships are to the delivery of core services, right? Whether it's on the health plan side or the provider side, this is different than it was a decade ago. You cannot deliver core healthcare services anymore without the reliability and support and delivery of your partners and vendors. And so I think that's only kind of growing and at a rapid rate. So this need for trust, this need for transparency, this need for open communication is only going to grow. I think it's fundamental, candidly, to commerce in healthcare and to the transactions and delivery of care in healthcare, and that's why kind of a framework and a way to communicate in a language that both sides can understand is really critical to the way we're going to deliver care and going forward.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll double down on it's critical because interoperability was a huge thing. It still is, obviously, but a few years ago. And to what Cliff was saying with your supply chain, your vendors, et cetera, right? As you're exchanging data, it's a huge importance to us as patients and the industry at large to make sure our data is secure. And one thing I'll touch on a little bit is just looking at HITRUST over the last 13 years that I've been doing it. From a external assessor standpoint, going through the QA process, and a lot of you go through that with us, but just going through that process, it's not a free pass, it's not a pay to play, it's a difficult, challenging experience to go through that, and rightfully so, to go through that QA process, and hats off to the QA team at HITRUST, because they've really learned and gained experiences going through that with us, the community at large, to provide a better QA. And that's where, to your point, the assurance comes into play. Because when you see a HITRUST report, you know what everybody's gone through, and that's why the industry accepts it so wildly, kind of as the de facto standard.
Yeah, the other thing I would add to that is, I remember in the early days when we started requiring our partners to be HITRUST certified, once a month I'd hear from someone saying, we have a third party, we really want to do business with them, but they don't want to do HITRUST and they've got issues with this. So then I would go meet with them, hear them out, what's your concern? And the bottom line would be, there's too many controls, it's too expensive, and people would ask me, how expensive is it to get HITRUST certified? And what I'd say to them is, the answer to that is the same as how expensive is it to renovate your home? Well, it depends. What does it depend on? It depends on how poor a condition your home is in. So if your home is in really, really poor shape, a renovation is going to be very costly. If your home is in pretty decent shape, a renovation is not going to be that costly. And so what I would turn around and say to some of these vendors is, so what you're telling me is the bar that I've set for adequate protection of my customers' data is too high a bar, and it's too expensive for you to protect my customers' data. Is that what you're telling me? And they're like, oh, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have said it's too expensive to do it, right? But that's sort of the important thing. Now, over the years, as organizations have gotten savvier, as they've deployed more controls, a lot of those concerns I don't hear nearly as often, but it's important to set the bar high. But then going back to the market, or the point earlier about being responsive to the market and responsive to the needs, what did HITRUST do over the last couple of years? We introduced a couple of different assurance levels. So now you have the I1, you have the E1, in addition to just having the R2. So it's sort of important to be able to hold multiple points of view at the same time. Yes, we want to be flexible. Yes, we want to set the bar high. Yes, we want to meet the needs of the market. And as a result of that, we keep rolling out services and products and mechanisms in order to meet all of those needs, which sometimes are divergent needs.
It's interesting because I would agree that what we deem as reliability, which is transparency, integrity, quality, and to some degree suitability, is important. And we've strived for many years to improve that and drive those numbers up, and so that, and I think we've always used the term, if you're going to rely on an assurance report, it should be reliable. What's interesting is, and then we got into this whole notion of relevance. And relevance was ensuring that the framework itself maintained its relevance because the reliability or the assurance was based on the controls themselves, and they needed to be. And we had Cyber Threat Adaptive, and we had all these, what we felt were really impressive programs, and then we went and we made our portfolio more traversable, and we expanded from a high assurance to a medium and low with the I1 and the E1. And then, as I think Cliff mentioned, we added our results distribution so that people could consume the results electronically. We thought we did a great job, but people, they really saw it as kind of different pieces, and it wasn't until we issued the trust report, which, by the way, is our most widely downloaded document ever. People just, then it was actually that they could see. They got it. Oh, okay, so basically all this other stuff was really necessary to get trust, and trust at a very high level. Okay, that I get. So I think most people don't appreciate all of the pieces that go into it, but they could see it was a tangible result, and that's what they wanted, was the result. And I think some people, and we saw this over time, they got a result, they got business because they could be a vendor to a customer, and they liked that, and others felt that they got risk mitigation. But the trust report was actually probably the tipping point, I think, for most people to really understand it. And we've seen the same thing on the TPRM side as well.
And Dan, that's where I wanted to go as well, was I keep thinking about the performance level we quantified with the trust report. And I think everybody would know this, but I'll just say it for clarity. The trust report wasn't written in 24 to report on how good we are in 24. It was written on 2 years of data, 22 and 23, and the data led to the conclusion, not the conclusion we're seeking, looking for the data. So I think, many of you are the people that have been at the forefront of this journey. You've been with HITRUST and this HITRUST journey for quite some time, and I think to explain the outcomes to your question, Sean, is that reliability based on all those principles that Sean asked about. The ultimate proof is, are you safer from a cybersecurity perspective today because you have invested in the work necessary to achieve that standard? Can you have confidence that you have achieved a level of trustworthiness in your operations? And I think the data proves it now. I think we've always believed it was the best system. We built a system based on science that we felt confident would deliver the outcomes that each of you would need to have to be secure and also to be compliant. But now we have the data to prove that it is the best model. And I'll make the argument all day long that the response of the relying parties, specifically the regulators, to the events in our industries is more regulation, more standards, and yet another approach to security coming down the path. They've never asked the real question, though, and all of you that are doing HITRUST are in possession of the right answer. They've never asked the question about, how do you actually know if the standard is being met or not? And that level of confidence and the ability to communicate with confidence that all these things, regardless of whether it's a large list or small list, we think it's the right list, but all of these things are achieved as evidenced by the fact that less than 1% of you have had issues because you've invested. So I think that is the proof point, and that's the thing we have to continue to reinforce, is that reliability based on relevance is in fact the secret sauce that makes this successful.
And the ecosystem, right? I mean, what Dan and HITRUST has built, I hope you all appreciate. For me, HITRUST is like no other organization, right? From an innovation perspective, like who else is innovating in this space? Like nobody across any industry is innovating. Sure, there's tech platforms, there's GRC platforms, but who else is innovating in this compliance, risk, standard space? Nobody else, and it doesn't work by just publishing a framework. It works because there's an ecosystem that evolves and continues to adapt and continues to innovate. And that's what HITRUST means for me, right? Like it's not just a framework. It's not just a bunch of standards. It's not just assurance framework. It's this whole ecosystem that has to work together and has to evolve and has to innovate in order to keep up. And hopefully everybody here has got a sense of pride about that, because you've helped achieve that. Where many in our industry, doing the same thing they've been doing for 20-something years, in our profession. I've been doing the same thing for 20-something years. HITRUST is evolving this compliance space like no other organization, something we all should be proud of.
So we only have a few minutes left. So for this group here, in a few words, what do you hope, with knowing what, being on the board, knowing what the future holds for HITRUST and the results that it will have on this community, what do you hope this group takes away from the next few days? Omar.
What I'd say is take advantage of HITRUST. Make sure you share your concerns, your expectations of HITRUST. And there are so many more services and capabilities that HITRUST offers than what the average organization out there is using. So think about how you can use the different parts and bring them together to solve the hard challenges you're solving for your organizations and your customers.
I would say find a new way to see value in what HITRUST has built. And so there's lots of vendors out there. We use the word ecosystem quite a bit. This is kind of it feels like a family. We've been coming here for a long time. It feels a little weird not seeing the water fountain at the Gaylord, but we've been coming for a long time. Embrace this group network, and then kind of my soapbox thing is find value in the framework. Yes, it's great to achieve certification. Hats off to you if you've done that. But look at how that transforms how you look at cybersecurity in your organization. Integrate it, adopt it, and embrace it as an organizational culture, because I think to me, that's where the true value is. And it goes back to roots. I think, Dan, on the mission you set out to achieve way back when is just really transforming the industry to make it a secure environment.
Yeah. My offer would be to I'll use a word Omar used in the AI session this morning. I'd ask you to unlearn a little bit of what you've thought about where HITRUST starts and where we stop. And it is based on an innovation journey, and the performance that we see through the trust report is impressive. It's still not good enough, and we know how to make it better, and we're going to talk about that over the next days as ways to make the assurance that you receive through the HITRUST ecosystem even higher levels of assurance, continuous monitoring, the things that are really going to change the world for you and make your jobs easier and make the reliability of your systems, the trustworthiness even higher. And stepping into spaces that we're new and novel with, like AI. I think there's just some exciting stuff there. So many of us have been with HITRUST for so long, we know it, we know where we think it is, and we know what we think the success factors it creates are. I would argue that we are creating much more for you, and I would really invite you to look at when we send things out, when we ask you to consider things, when we ask you for feedback, give us the feedback, because we are designing something that's exciting for the future, and it's based on everything we do today.
Yeah, I feel like I'm sounding like a broken record, but I kind of reiterating what my colleagues have said here, plug into the ecosystem, right? And plug into the ecosystem with a vision towards innovation in the space. Like Dan mentioned RDS, for example. RDS may sound like a technology, but like delivering, the point is that we're going to deliver assurance electronically, like that, versus pushing documents around to each other, right? And so that's a step in terms of innovation. That's a step in terms of the right direction in our space. And so plug into that, figure out how to adopt it, figure out how to promote it, because it evolves the whole industry and the whole space in the right direction.
Yeah, I have not much else to say. I think this, I don't even know how many this is. This is, I think, number 13 or 12. I don't remember how many we've had, but I think the value, it's, some people call it a conference. I call this a big user group. And I think the opportunity is just to provide feedback. HITRUST bases what we do on what the market tells us, what we perceive, where we think the market's going. And these events are extremely important for us to get that feedback. I think there are, and we probably have said this before, but I think this year there are 3 or 4 big initiatives that are larger, that are setting out a direction that we think is pretty exciting. Some that are delivering in 24 and 25, and some 25, 6, and 7, and I think those are pretty exciting. And being able to get feedback from the market on those is going to be important for us. So.
Before we adjourn, I want to thank Dan for everything. Dan doesn't like the limelight. We got him to really dress up for this occasion.
I showed up.
He showed up and dressed up, but this is the guy that's Preston. I mean, if there's anybody behind the scenes, you wouldn't believe Preston for innovation, Preston for progress, Preston for outcomes, Preston for objectives. And so he's not the kind of guy that's out front and center taking credit for all of it, but he's the kind of guy that's making it work behind the scenes. So before we adjourn, I just, on behalf of all of us that have been involved a long time, I want to say thanks.
Dan, thank you for showing up and for making this happen. Cliff, Robert, Andrew, and Omar, thank you so much for your insights. Hope everybody enjoyed that. Please enjoy the conference, connect with each other. You have each other here to learn from. So thank you all.
Thank you all.
Great.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Sean and Marco's On Location event coverage conversations. Please take a moment to give the show a good rating and leave a comment. Remember to share this podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues. Come back for more conversations and follow Sean Martin and Marco Ciappelli as they continue their journey toward redefining cybersecurity and society.